Hello and welcome to Bad End Podcast. This is episode number 103. I'm Josh Calixto, joined today by friend of the show, frequent guest, slash Superculture Network affiliate, Yussef Cole. Yussef, say hello. Tell us what you've been up to recently.
Yo, what's up? Very happy to be here to join you, talk about this week or so in games and whatever else. Yeah, I've been playing some games. I've been doing my thing.
Let's talk a little bit about, because you are at Bullet Points. That's the majority of the work that you've been doing for Superculture Network. Recently had an anniversary stream last weekend. First of all, congrats on the 5th anniversary of Bullet Points. Site's been around for a while. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about Bullet Points and what you guys do over there?
Absolutely. Yeah, we just had that stream. Thanks for reminding me. It's like a blur of things happening. But yeah, the Bullet Points. So I haven't been editor the full 5 years, but I joined editing about 2 years ago. The site are basically long form criticism is what we do. That's the aim. There's certainly also an allegiance to first person shooters or shooters of other kinds, but we'll cover whatever game suits our fancy because it's just me and Reed running it, so we get to do what we want. And yeah, it's every month we cover a different game and hire a few different freelancers, game writers to write something about the game and give it their take. And we publish it on our site, and we've been doing it for 5 years. So it's pretty dope. It's a really cool site. Everyone should check it out. And yeah, we did the stream on Saturday. Just I think it had a few different aims. I mean, definitely to get some more money toward our Patreon, which we accomplished, which was good. But it's also really nice to get other people involved, or just because we worked with so many people, so being able to just catch up with everybody and get everyone involved with the stream, with the site, to talk to people and see where people were at was just really awesome. Actually, it kind of turned me around on streaming a little bit. I feel like I want to do more streaming now, just because it's like really nice to be able to connect with people in a way other than like Discord or Twitter or what have you.
Yeah, I find that it's a lot more interactive, obviously, than the podcast format. People are usually really receptive to it, and it's not like a thing that's mutually exclusive with podcasts, where you can kind of do both at the same time and feel like you're accomplishing a lot on either front. And you guys did a great job with this stream. I was actually one of the guests, but we had a lot of other great people on the show. So if you want to check that out, you definitely should. Bullet Points is on Twitch. Do you know what the handle is for Bullet Points on Twitch?
I think it's just Bullet Points Monthly.
Okay, so check out Bullet Points on Twitch. You could probably still dig up the VOD from that. But it was a 12-hour stream. It wasn't actually 12 hours, but I call it a 12-hour stream. So go check it out.
Just keep saying it, yeah.
Some great content, great conversation. We talked a lot about Canada in the episode, or the section that I was on, because Zach Coetzer was there, of Funland, and Reed, and they're both Canadian, and they love talking about CanCon. I didn't even know that was a thing.
The whole world of Canada out there.
Yeah, it's a whole universe, the Canada extended universe.
But we were also playing Halo, the first one, and I was curious whether that inspired you to pick up Reach, to jump into Reach.
Not necessarily. Well, sort of, actually, because I started playing Reach like a couple weeks ago because it's on Game Pass, and the Anniversary Collection is, and I picked it up because I was interested in playing Halo again, and because I used to love the crap out of Halo as a kid, but picking it up again was such a weird experience because, first of all, I had never played Reach, so I was like, let's try that one. Like, it's another Halo game, right? And it's just like, there was so many years of Halo that I missed. I played like 1 through 3, and then after that didn't really touch a Halo game, and then all of a sudden this game is just totally I feel like I'm maybe seeing stuff through rose-colored glasses, but it feels like it's trying so hard to be like a realistic modern warfare type shooter when I felt like the stuff that made Halo excel in the first place was the stuff that it was doing that was opposed to that kind of whole vibe. Granted, like the first Halo came out at a time where like modern warfare wasn't even a thing yet, so maybe it's unfair to judge it on those grounds. But at the same time, I picked up this game and it's like the assault rifle does like no damage unless you're like right up close. There's like a lot of ammo issues in that game. There's this like way more, it feels like they've tried a lot harder to balance everything, which feels like a very modern obsession to me. Not that that's wrong necessarily, but it's not what I want necessarily out of a Halo game. So playing Reach has been weird because of that to me.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like they probably balanced it a lot toward the multiplayer, right? Because that's always been like the consideration with Halo.
Yeah. But I mean, I feel like there was a time where they were a lot worse at it, which is not,
Mm.
which sounds like a bad thing, but I think is a good thing when you're playing the campaign of a game like this and you're playing it for the gun. Like think about Destiny, for instance. Destiny is a game that has to be to an extent balanced for multiplayer. I'm sure some people would laugh at me because of that, but it's also like balanced toward PvE where it's just like as long as you're grinding, your numbers are going up. Your accuracy is like never terrible, but in this game it only feels like there's like a couple guns that are good. You know, like I'm having trouble killing grunts with like big rocket launchery type guns. There's this like concussion
Mhm.
gun or something like that the aliens have, and when they're using it on me, it's like kicking my ass. And I use it, and it takes like four direct hits to kill a grunt with that thing. And I'm like, what is with these guns? Like I get that you can't make them too powerful, but at the same time, like, give me a break, man. Um,
Yeah, totally. It's like very. I mean, it's experimental, which is kind of cool, but it's also like it has to work. And the first Halo, just playing through it Saturday, like there's definitely things where you respect the commitment to their system, which is to not ever like stick with one gun. The whole point of it is just to keep throwing down guns and picking up whatever is nearby. But then you get stuck with a needler and you have to shoot an enemy in a specific spot, and then you're fucked. Like unless you
right.
can find some other gun. So it really like it has huge pitfalls, which Destiny made a lot smoother, like by not doing that at all. Like it's very much like not. It's like it is about the gun game, but it's more about like the RPG grind of getting better guns. Whereas Halo, it's like the opposite. The guns that like are the least important thing in the game, even though it's all you have to access the world.
Yeah. I It just feels less like a power fantasy to me. Um and it also just it feels like not very good at the same time. Like I guess the big shooter that I've played recently, I played shooters, between this and this one that I'm about to talk about, but the one that really sticks and that I kind of measure other shooters against right now is Valorant. And that is a quote realistic game because you die really quickly even though you have these powers and stuff like that, but the gunplay in that feels so much more satisfying than in this Halo game. And maybe that's like it's turned me off to this kind of game, but it feels like this installment of Halo specifically is trying to go for this middle ground between like power fantasy where you have these like dope big guns and stuff, and then like the realistic Call of Duty type shooter where you have to you like it's not fair for every gun to kill you in 2 shots, but it's like I'm playing on normal campaign mode. Like just let me have a little fun here, dude. Like you even in Destiny, like you get these headshots and these critical hits, and it feels so satisfying. But I don't feel that sense of like crunch. It doesn't feel like tactile in Halo Reach to me.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, Destiny is definitely one of my favorite shooters on the tactility and the gun feel alone. Like, it has so much other uh, bullshit on top of it that makes it a much worse game. But as a shooter, it's like super entertaining, and they know what makes it feel good. But Halo, yeah, like, I mean, it came out later, so like they definitely learned a thing or two, obviously. But like, yeah, I think there's something about Halo where it's like, I think trying to be more of a pure video game, or it's like you got to know all the tactics and all the min maxing to do it right. And then like Destiny is just like, no, it's just like, wait, spend a couple hours after work and like goof off and enjoy this experience. We're not trying to like measure your skill here.
Yeah. There's something about the floatiness of Halo that is kind of its signature to me. And I really like that about it. Maybe it's hitting different too because I'm playing with mouse and keyboard now, and it's just like such a different vibe overall.
Maybe, yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's just something about this installment of Halo. I think if I try playing the OG, it'll hit me a little better than this one is.
It's crazy how many Halos there are. Because I was like looking at the whole anniversary edition, whatever it's called, and it's just like so many. And I haven't played half of them, and I'm just like, I kind of want to play them since they're on my computer, but I'm also a little like, I don't know, like if it would just get overwhelming. Like even playing the first one, I'm like, okay, I'm good for a while.
Yeah, there's like ODST. Who wants to play ODST?
You don't even get to play as the Space Marine.
Yeah,
like you're playing as like a regular soldier. No, thank you.
Isn't like Nathan Fillion in that one? Isn't that it's like
No, I think that's like another one.
Oh.
I think it's like there's because there's ones that like I don't think did they work on all of them? Because I think there's some that Bungie didn't work on, or that the new studio that Microsoft
there's like
created for Halo.
Right. Maybe
worked
that's where
on
all of these changes came in. Get off my lawn, kids.
Yeah, I mean, you should
shit.
You should try. You should just try since you have it. You should just try the first Halo and see how it measures up. Because I think that there are like there's the element of like of franchise rut that these big games get into, where they're just kind of making the sequels for the sake of it. Because I was just watching that Noah Gervais like Resident Evil video that's been going around, where he just reviewed every single Resident Evil, and that's a big theme of it, where it's like it's a franchise which has its peaks and valleys, and sometimes like the valleys like just feel like they just didn't know what to do, or they were just kind of huffing their own like paint, like they were just like, we're so awesome, like there's like when you're at the top there's no place to go but down, and then you kind of get some of that where it's like they just get too full of themselves and don't try and innovate or innovate in ways that are not actually like beneficial. And it's just because it's this like massive franchise that has to make a new version of the game, but also like doesn't really know where to go from where it is.
Right. And that's the video game thing. Once you get into that franchise grind, you're just like, what new feature are we going to do now? And you become beholden to that philosophy of like, we have to change something, but we have to stay true to the original. And in video games especially, it feels just so many studios just kind of lock up in that zone and they just kind of cruise, and it feels like Halo kind of did that. And that's not to say that that Reach is a bad game per se, but it doesn't feel like a significant improvement. It doesn't really feel like I'm playing something super different from the original Halo. And it's just not as interesting to me as that game. But I'll play more of it just because, shooting stuff is fun.
It is. Yes.
Like literally I was just watching you guys play Halo during that stream the other day, and I was just like, it's so almost calming in a way. You're just, that game is so watching you guys play that, it just reminded me of how much interesting stuff was happening in that game that people never really discussed, and I don't really know if it even gets discussed to this day, where it's just got this truly meditative quality about it that is it's totally intentional. Like the way you're just going through these like brutalist alien spaces, and you were literally going through these hallways that look like exactly the same for like 45 minutes. And I'm watching this going like, did something glitch? I thought you were playing horde mode or something like that. But no, it's like it's just repeating the same enemies over and over. Like you're just kind of doing the same thing over, and it's very quiet. There's not really much music. It's all very moody. The lighting is very soft, and the alien architecture, it's not super oppressive, I wouldn't say. The Covenant has their shit going on. You know, it's beautiful, beautiful stuff. And then you did this thing where apparently it lets you switch to this like new art style where you press a button and it switches to like, if Halo was designed today, like here's how our artists would have done it. And it looks like fucking Dead Space 4 or something, like super intense, kind of demonic in a way that is like totally off base from the original. And it's kind of gross, not because the architecture and the way the game itself looks is gross, but because it's just such a betrayal of the original aesthetic that it's like, this literally lost everything that was like interesting about what was happening in the original Halo, you know?
Yeah, it's crazy how much it misreads the intent or the art direction of the original, or just ignores it. Where it's like, we're just going to throw like every texture at this and every glowing layer that we can add. Like it's not supposed to be that much lighting. It's supposed to be dark, and then you just like enter this room and it's just like you're entering like a day glow like magic mirror like haunted house. It's pretty weird. And I was thinking about it. It's like, I mean, part of the meditative nature, I think, is because, like, just playing Halo, like you're reminded just of the games that came before and the games that came after, and the way it sits at this crux of shooters, where like it does make a ton of pretty amazing advancements, like vehicles and really big spaces. Because like the technology couldn't do that before. Like you couldn't have that big a draw distance, and so it coming out on I think it was the Xbox or whatever, like that being the big technological flagship of the console, and yeah, that's like a big deal. And I think like people were used to these, like they were used to corridor shooters, right? Like the earlier like Doom and those games, like, I mean, even Quake, like you play Quake now, it's like so abstract because you're just going through from one brown hall to another. And then like sometimes there's a little bit of gray, and like it's so easy to get lost because everything looks the same. I think that's just what people are used to. And now there's obviously a lot more variety. And Halo, I think, made huge advancements in some areas, but also was a product of its time, right? Like they were just going to like gamers were going to be okay with a certain amount of repetition and a certain amount of simplicity that they wouldn't accept anymore.
Yeah, and it is very much a response to the games of that time where every shooter was harsh and everything was loud and graphic and crunchy and kind of gross and grungy. And it, like, to depart from that felt like it had a lot of connotations, right? It felt like I feel like even today, our idea of a departure from that type of aesthetic is the total knee-jerk opposite side thing, where it's like this like nice, cute, empathetic games that make you cry type thing. But sometimes like you can make an adjustment like that to your art style and make it like a calm shooter and have it still feel different in a way that that doesn't like undermine all of the qualities of first person shooters, but that like just changes it up. And I feel like we still don't get that type of a change up from first person shooters, and I think that's what Halo was really dialed into that we still don't have today. I can't really think of a precedent or of something that followed up Halo that did those things in a way that was similarly satisfying. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I mean, because it was followed so quickly by like Call of Duty and then Gears of War, and that kind of took over the atmosphere so thoroughly and that like became the winner of the aesthetic basically for the next decade.
Right.
I mean, you have Overwatch now, which is like leaning into like softer aesthetics, but it's not a single player game, like so it's a little different.
Yeah, and it doesn't trickle over into the way that the sound design works and the way that the mechanics work, and kind of the sparseness of the atmosphere is something that catches me about Halo a lot too, where you have like these massive fields that are just like widely empty, and then
Mm.
these buildings that are just like empty and repetitive. uh it's such a weird thing when you watching you guys play this game was such a trip, because it's like you don't see games do that. Which I'm not, again, not saying that it's a bad thing, and I'm not trying to say that like games have fallen off since then, but it's surprising that you don't see more games follow in those types of footsteps where you're switching things up in that kind of way. It's like people find these like points of variation within video games where it's like, oh, here's where we can do something interesting, and it's always in like what the gun does, or like how many times you can shoot it, or what the bullets do, or what they look like. And it's never really in like how much stuff are we putting in a room, how much lighting are we going to have, how much these more subtle artistic details that really define the look and feel of a game like Halo. And I feel like the first Halo is really a masterclass in that, and is something that today's designers can definitely learn from. Not that they will,
Mhm.
but there's so
No,
much
like I think
space there.
the thing is, it's just like this. It comes down to technology so frequently, right? Like it's just there was space because there could be space, but also you couldn't fill it with too many things. And now you have Black Ops and Call of Duty. Like I played the new one last year, where like a room had 5 million objects in it because they were just like, dude, look how many objects we can fit into this room. Look how many textures. Look how many like uh, discrete objects we can create for this world. And like they don't have there's not a, I mean the art direction is like leaning into like stuff shows like the Americans and like that like Cold War aesthetic, but like you don't have the choice doesn't feel like taken from that as much as it feels driven by needing to like show how many polygons you can stuff into something. Like it's always going to be about like the technology showcase comes first.
Right. And when it when there are limitations, it just results in like a product that feels incomplete. As opposed to like,
Yeah.
they didn't make their goal smaller, they just like cut off the amount of time that they work on it, and we're like, let's just fix the rest after the game's launch type thing, you know.
Hmm.
It's like that philosophy of like, let's do brutalism because like it has pretty simple polygon shapes, and we can make a building look like beautiful in this, and we can have the lighting look really interesting, and let's do like these wide open atmospheres. Like setting their goals almost lower in a sense and working within this restriction. Whereas you look at something like Cyberpunk and they're like, we have to do RTX, we have to do, at least 100 pedestrians on the street at a time, and whatever doesn't work we'll just fix in a patch later. And didn't turn out so well, obviously. I mean, obviously Cyberpunk is a low hanging fruit there, but it's a common thing in games now where it's like, let's just do as much as we can, and whatever is not finished, just put out an MVP essentially. Um, but
That's a good point though. It's like because Witcher similar engine, and it's just because it's in nature by design, you have to have less things in there, and even like that like helps. You're just like, okay, I'm not running into a person every like 5 minutes. Like I'm
right,
just like in the woods, and that's sick. And then like with Cyberpunk, obviously, I mean Cyberpunk as a genre is about crowds and cities, but like you also have to think about game design. You have to think about the player experience, and I think like they were so beholden to being able to like showcase the best of gaming technology, and also like this dream of like being able to be Johnny Mnemonic or whatever, like that it just kind of tripped on its own weight.
Johnny Silverhand. God, I forgot
Keanu
so
Reeves.
much about that. Jeez,
Uh,
can't believe that game
yeah.
actually happened like that. Wow. Okay, speaking of art direction, I feel like we should move on from Halo. Death's Door. We both played that. How are
That's
you
right.
feeling? How are you feeling about Death's Door?
It's actually interesting because I remember there was a conversation on the Superculture Slack about what part of games were the best, like the beginning, middle, or last third. And I was thinking about it with Death's Door because for me it's always the middle that's the feels the best because you've passed the tutorial segments, you have most of the power ups you need, like you're actually getting to interact with most of the game systems, and that's I think where I'm at with Death's Door now. Like I think almost all the weapons, most of the ranged attacks. For anybody who doesn't know, it's like this isometric 3D kind of hack and slash game where you play a little crow that runs around these like kind of like fantasy style worlds and attack enemies. It like structurally it's pretty familiar to a lot of games, but I think it was starting like just the past few days I started to get, and I haven't been playing that much of it, but like kind of piecemeal. Just the past few days, it's gotten to this point where I'm like, oh, okay, like I'm seeing some of where it's like pushing things a little bit. Like it's got some of the Metroidvania, like you need an item to get into an area, but mixing that with actually the 3D perspective gets to some really cool like puzzles that you unlocked, almost like Zelda style, where you roll through a hedge and then there's an area where you can go underneath the whole map and you're like, and it feels like you're really discovering something. And I kind of stumbled on this just like playing a few days ago, and I was like, oh, that's pretty sick. But I think like for the large part of what I've been playing like 5 or 6 hours, like yeah, it's like very like it's very polished, very well executed, but also a well tread approach, well tread genre of like top down hack and slashes. So it wasn't until recently that I'm like, okay, it has some elements that actually make it stand out.
Yeah, I think the game definitely does stand out. But I don't think that that's its problem. That's the
Mm-hmm.
thing is like it's interesting because this is something that we haven't talked about on this show that much, which is we typically tend to really prioritize games that stand out from the crowd because of what they do artistically. And I feel like this game does not have a problem with that, but something else about it is really just making it not stick for me. And I don't know if it's the way the game feels. It feels kind of clunky. It feels kind of sluggish. I feel like when I'm slashing around, like things aren't registering, and the way that the rolls work are kind of weird. And I don't feel like the combat is like, I don't want to say it's not complex. I just feel like there's not anything really interesting going on. It's just like kind of walk up to a dude and slash a couple times and then walk away and rinse and repeat and you're good. But I think that like when I go to play this game, I'm not really enjoying myself all that much, but I'm looking at it at the same time and being like, oh, this is a really cool game. Like there's some really neat stuff going on here. I like the way that this art style looks, and it just feels like they're putting a bunch of disparate parts together and doing a lot of new things at the same time, but they don't come together in a way that makes me feel like it's a game that I'm really enjoying, despite the fact that I think there's interesting things going on there and it is, quote, a good game. Um, it's
Yeah.
like it's like this. There's like the whole "so bad it's good" thing with media. This almost feels like so okay that it's like kind of meh, so good that it's meh. I
So
don't
good that
really
it's
know.
Matt.
Yeah,
No, I feel that. It's like, I mean, part of it's just because there's just so many games and there's so many good games. It's just like a tough field to stand out in.
yeah,
And I feel for the game in that respect. But yeah, I think I mean its aesthetic is really strong, and it's like really like it's really nice to explore the worlds. Like the music is really good, the art style is really nice. Like yeah, I think you're right about some of the combat mechanics. Like the roll, for example, like there's like the roll, and you can kind of do a strong attack coming out of the roll, and it's supposed to be like this really important attack, but I almost never use it because it's so hard to aim it. So I end up just like constantly like overshooting the enemies, or just doing the thing where the best move is to walk up, slash, and walk away, or roll away, or whatever. Especially like some of the enemies that have like really fast, like strong, like attacks that like you can't always predict. Like it feels like there's some knowledge of like more traditional action RPGs, like, but it's also, I don't know if it's like, if it's operating at that caliber, but it's like, but because the aesthetic is so nice, it's like, it's definitely pleasant to spend time in that world, and it does feel like a capital G game where you're kind of just like, this is a video game, man. I'm just like, I'm a little bird walking around a Zelda world, like doing my thing, like finding treasures, finding power ups, and like as like kind of a brain turn off experience. It's working. I don't know if I'll beat it, but I mean, I'm still engaging with it. Like it's not boring. It's just like, yeah, I think that it has some areas where it feels a little soft, or it feels like it's not like it's at that meh category. Like it's just like, it's above meh because I'm enjoying it, but it's like, yeah, it's definitely not blowing me away until those few moments where I was able to like do some cool puzzle thing where I'm just like, oh shit, I'm like, this is cool. This feels like I'm like solving a puzzle organically. But again, that's not happening all the time. That's like a pretty infrequent thing.
Yeah, it occupies this really unusual space where it's like you can't hold anything against the game, but it's just not it's not like hitting that spot. I don't know what else to say about the game besides that. But I will say too, like a lot of the game kind of does feel empty at times, which is also really weird because I'm like, how do they make games feel so crowded, and yet like this one, it feels like they were trying to stuff it with things that are industry standard. Like there's a leveling system in there. There's like equipment that you can get. There's collectibles. There's secret shrines. There's different enemy types and strategies. But it doesn't. But it often it feels like I'm just like, once I've killed all the guys in a room, it just feels like I'm just like walking around a fucking museum installment or something, where there's just nothing else there, which is just such a weird thing because like there's a way to make an empty game feel full. We were just talking about Halo and how it's really good at that. There's ways to make a full game feel kind of empty. Like I feel like Horizon Zero Dawn is an exercise in that, where there's always stuff in front of you, but I always felt like I don't want to do anything else. And this game kind of sits in the middle of that, where it's just it always feels like there's something there, but at the same time, like you have these moments where it feels like really empty. And I guess there's a kind of magical ingredient that a lot of games these days have that we kind of take for granted, where they do have this sense of feeling populated and they do have this sense of like having something to do. But this game, it doesn't really have that for me. And I think that's where it's missing something, despite the fact that I still enjoy playing it.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense to me. And it actually reminds me of a game that does this really well, or filling space really well, which is Hollow Knight. For me, it's like, I love that game. And it's also a Metroidvania, but it's 2D. And the spaces are really tight and compressed, actually. Like, it doesn't really have too many big open spaces because you're a bug exploring tiny tunnels. But there's, it does a thing where if you heal or travel anywhere, then the enemies will replenish. And I think Death's Door does that too, or something similar. But I think because of the 3D plane of Death's Door, like there's not as much a connection between the enemies and the area. Like there's a randomness to it. And with Hollow Knight, if you play it enough, you always know exactly where the enemy is going to be. Like like, in this section of the room, like I know there's going to be a guy here, there's going to be a guy there, and you kind of like, but it doesn't get tired because it's so fun to fight them or to figure out ways to get past them really quickly. It's like they become part of the texture of the world. Like the enemies in the world are like inextricably tied together. Like they're just facets of each other. Whereas in Death's Door, it feels a bit more like there's a world and then they put enemies on top of it. And I think some of that is just like the nature of the or the where the design falls a little bit or fails a little bit.
Yeah. Hollow Knight's a good example because that game, there's also a lot of variation that gives you the feeling that it can kind of go anywhere with its approach. You know, like a lot of the spaces are really cramped, but at the same time you'll find yourself in a space that's just wide open and you have no clue where the bottom of this pit is. And man, I came fully around on Hollow Knight. Like I was so disparaging and I was a hater for a while cuz I was like, you know what, it's just like I couldn't really get into it at first, but once you start seeing more of this world and where it goes, it's really that's a game where the middle chunk is where you really start seeing what's going on there, because it starts revealing its world, and it just becomes this mystic like journey into, it feels like this world of fossils and ancient lore and ancient ideas, and it gets really scary, and the sounds change, and there's a great sense of mood. And I'm not getting that as much from Death's Door, which I feel is actually a pretty close analog as far as art style. You know, you got these like little kind of cute creatures that are in, you know, an ostensibly more dangerous world than you would imagine them to be for the cartoonish art design. You've got this kind of Metroidvania approach with a slightly unforgiving combat system, upgrades and all that stuff. But yeah, I think Death's Door just isn't going in the places where Hollow Knight did. So I would almost compare it
There's
to yeah.
less of a sense of like mystery, or like a sense of like the world being kind of constructed, or like or having this like the spatial element is like not there. Part of it is because you're teleporting around so much through doors. You don't really you don't connect the worlds to each other. You don't connect to the spaces as much. I'm also kind of wish there was a map.
Yeah,
that was an interesting choice
same.
to take the map out.
Yeah, same. Well, I got that. You know what? I think the first 10 minutes of this game, where you're in the black and white, like kind of subway space, that was like almost more interesting to me than when you go into the world where you're actually fighting stuff, and it's a lot more colorful. Because I was looking at things and feeling like, where am I? What is this place? What's going on around me? And then after that, you kind of go into like, oh, I'm in like a fantasy world now, you know?
Yeah, I think like I almost what I'm realizing from the middle game with Death's Door is like it is starting to introduce depth to it, like changing levels where you can, once you get certain items to break down barriers, you can like in the cemetery, for example, you can like this area that you've been traveling through a lot, you can break down a wall and then just fall down a big hole into the like kind of the dungeon area of it that's just full of spiders and boulders, and it's otherwise empty, and it feels like you're like, oh shit, this is awesome, like I'm exploring like a different part of this space. And it also feels like there's a geographic shift that's happening live versus between like teleportations, and that alone like creates like such a sense of like wonder and mystery that otherwise is usually missing when you're just kind of sampling from an area versus exploring it. And there's also like in the jungle part, like the similar situation where there's like the jungle, and then eventually you can like figure out, you can like get underneath it and you're in the dungeon part of it, and that like that stuff is really cool. And I mean, that stuff reminds me a lot of Hollow Knight, where it's like having access to like one part of the world, and then like going one level below and it's totally different and it's totally spooky and mysterious. And I think it just takes too long to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I always forget that I can play footage from these games on the stream. But yeah. I mean, just like, it's pretty to look at. Like, if you just watch this footage, it's like, it's a world that you definitely appreciate being in. It's hard to be playing this game and think like, oh, I'm miserable. I don't want to be playing this right now. But at the
Yeah.
same time, like you'll play for 2 hours and be like, all right, I'm that's enough Death's Door for the day. Which there's a lot of other games where I do not feel that impulse to just like, I'm like fatigued from playing this game for so long.
Mhm.
And I don't. It's hard to put into words like why that feeling comes, but I feel like we've touched on some of that here. Hopefully, I think there is that kind of sense that there's just not much going on underneath the surface.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But apparently there is. It takes you a second to find it.
yes. That's always the gamble I guess you take with any game like this. I also played. Have you heard of the Ascent?
I've been seeing people talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cyberpunk sort of two-stick shooter that's also like dungeon crawlery. Also kind of like isometric perspective. It's kind of got like a Diablo vibe in that respect. Pull up some footage here if you're watching the video stream. This is what it looks like. It looks pretty Cyberpunk 2077-ish. It's got that like kind
It's got
of,
the cyberpunk texture.
yeah, RTX vibe. Very dungeon crawlery, harsh shadows look to it. It almost reminds me of like a StarCraft with the way that everything looks, or like an early '90s vibe. I think of like
Mhm.
Abe's Oddworld Odyssey, and I feel like a lot of games in the '90s had this kind of look. Does that make
It's kind of
sense?
like where they could pre-render the lighting, like, and so you get like richer textures.
Yeah, it has a pre-rendered look to it. That is hilarious. I wonder how much of that legacy they're actually pulling from. But you know, it does go places. A lot of different environment types. But I'm not really paying attention to the story. The writing's kind of crappy. The UX is just awful. Like,
Really?
oh yeah. There's no like I've been playing a lot of really shitty UX/UI games recently. Death's Door is kind of one of them. Like
Hmm.
all of the UI shit in that game, and like it feels really kind of clunky, not really responsive, kind of behind the times, behind the curve on a lot of stuff. The menus don't like do things that you would expect typical menus to do. This game, the same way. Like it took me forever to figure out like where your health bar is located. I still don't know.
Important thing.
Yeah, I still don't know where the like if there's a stamina gauge or something, but you run out of rolls and you have to like wait to be able to roll again. There's a lot
Hate
of
that.
dialogue weirdness where it's just like it's just a regular menu for dialogue. Like they use the same menu for dialogue as they use kind of for everything else, and they didn't put any attention into like the norms of how dialogue works in video games nowadays. Where like if you choose one dialogue option and it comes back once the other character's dialogue completes, like it doesn't gray it out to say that you've already selected it. And it starts back on the first dialogue option every time you go through one. So if there's like 6 different questions you can ask like the shopkeeper or something, like, and then you go through and you ask like one, it'll bring you back and it'll put your cursor on the first one, so you have to like scroll down to the second one, and then they'll say the second one, and then you spits you back up to the first one. You go to the third. You don't remember which ones you've already chosen. It's kind of a mess. But
Yeah, it sounds gnarly.
it is. It really is a game that you just kind of like hop into and just you gotta just let it do its thing and let it work its magic on you. And if it doesn't work that magic on you, you just play for the shooting, which, to be fair, is pretty good. Like it's very turn off your brain, point your stick and hold the trigger type of game.
Yeah, it's definitely a satisfying mechanic that games discovered in this NES era.
Yes, twin stick stuff is lots of fun. And there's
Did you ever
no.
play Ruiner?
Yes, I played like 5 minutes for that, but that one also felt kind of clunky, and I stopped.
It was a little, yeah. There's like a little feeling of like not under, yeah, just not being able to read stuff that easily, like whether an enemy was getting hit or like whether you were getting hit. Just like a little bit of too much. It's like that layer, the too much of like a flat layer of like interaction.
Yeah,
Like it wasn't like registering well enough to feel fun.
right. And I just have so. It's weird because I talk about a lot of games, quote, as a critic, which is to say that I think critically about games as I play them, and that determines how I talk about them afterwards. But there's so many games that I bounce off of that are for reasons that I wouldn't consider to be like in line with my critical approach or like critical values. It's just stuff where it's like it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good for me to play this game, and I'm not really enjoying my time, so I just bounce off of it, you know. Um,
Dude, I mean, there's we don't get paid enough to to play games that we're not having any like, and we're not like getting, I guess, hooked in by, or we're not getting like some satisfaction from mechanically. Like we're not here to like suffer through these because they're not short games either.
Yeah, and
So
that is something that is also like not talked about when it comes to video game criticism, is the fact that like if someone spent 40 hours on a game and then they say something shitty about it afterwards, the odds are that like they did enjoy at least like the experience of playing the game to an extent, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Like it sounds like a weird thing to say, but there's been a bunch of games where afterwards I kind of processed the game and I was like, that wasn't a very good game, but I enjoyed it. I think that's where a lot of like the flawed masterpiece type stuff comes from, because there's like a very disconnected experience of playing a game and evaluating it on a different level. Um,
yeah,
but at the same
yeah.
time,
That's
like
absolutely.
you should be able to like acknowledge that gap exists, and it's okay to just be like, yeah, I enjoyed playing it, but it wasn't a particularly good game, I wouldn't say. You know?
Yeah, I think there. Yeah, it's kind of like there's this aspect of playing a game where you're engaging with a software object with an interactive experience. So like, uh, it's almost like we can we can explore the narrative layer, the surface layer, but if you can't like do the equivalent of turning the page of a book or like sitting through a movie or like understanding the movie, then you're not going to be able to get. You're just not going to go. You're just simply not going to be able to like be the target or like or receptive audience for the narrative and surface layer, because you're going to be so like tied up in the fact that you're struggling with like the functionality of it. And I think that's definitely happens with me for a lot of games where I'm just like, this idea seems cool, like this concept seems great, but I'm also just like I'm stuck on square one, like I'm just like I can't actually like read what you are putting down because it's so like frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird too, because people seem to understand the Steam reviewer thing of like 800 hours played, thumbs down. People seem to understand like where that comes from, but they also can't understand when like people give a a critically or Metacritic 88% game like
Mm-hmm.
a 6,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah,
like
because I
those.
mean they're just judging it on the functional part, right? Like they're just being like, did pressing A feel good? Yes, 90, 80, 90. Like if it functioned as like a piece of software, then that's where they want to stop. But yeah, like then but yeah, like it's weird. It's like basically there's the assumption that because the software functions, because it's not buggy. Like the biggest crime that Cyberpunk made was not like being sexist or transphobic. It was like not functioning as advertised. So like
Yeah,
that is like, yeah, that's the problem. Like it's not like critics don't want that part to work as well. but we also like want to make sure that like thematically and narratively like we're like getting a good experience, we're getting something that's like worthwhile.
Yeah, or something that you can like talk about afterwards in a capacity beyond like, was the shooting good, you know?
Yeah, because then you kind of have that even with like say Death's Door, where it's like, you know, it's fine, but also just like is it as like, yeah, does it you like it's kind of, I think we did a good job of like kind of explaining where it like doesn't match stuff like Hollow Knight, which is similarly like very similar in a lot of ways, but then also like has a world that does feel like more like much more thought out and much more like unique, and that isn't, and like they both are perfectly functional games, and they both like are pretty close in terms of like interactivity, but then like just like how do you then examine the, or then it's about talking about the elements that like make it stand out, make one game stand out from the other, make like, because like otherwise it's boring, otherwise what's the point of talking about it, because then you're just talking about like a checkbox. You're like, all right, like, you know, it does the shooting good, next. And that's kind of like, yeah, like a dull way to keep like to talk about games. You need to like have that extra layer.
Yeah. And I mean, and it doesn't, and there's not one layer, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's the other thing too, is that people assume that, I think the critical trend is to talk about like a few specific things outside of the gameplay. And this was like brought up in that like one thread that was posted, right? Like, he's talking about how like a lot of people talk about games in the context of like whatever they felt like talking about in the moment, which tends to kind of gravitate toward like identity. It tends to gravitate toward just like a couple specific themes, but that's not like, that's such, just because like that's what a lot of people tend to do in like the publications that that person follows, does not mean that those are the only lenses through which you can see video games. I think there's a lot of different video games that deserve to be seen through different types of lenses. And then there's like certain lenses that like when you apply them to certain games, just like, okay, what am I going to get out of like this type of a specific type of critique? Like I don't know if I'm going to get as much out of like a capitalist critique of Mario as I would, you know, looking at like the capitalism of Cyberpunk 2077, which is not to say that's not like an interesting lens through which to look at a game like Mario, but it's like, it's not, there's not every lens is created equal, and I think different games deserve to be looked at in different ways. And it's not always just like, is this thing good or bad compared to like what the developers were trying to do, which I think people kind of mistake for being quote good criticism nowadays, where it's like, what were they trying to do and did they accomplish it, is like the ideal of what criticism should be for some people. And it's like, that's not really interesting, because what if they weren't going for anything and they did a really good job of not fucking going for anything? Does that mean the game was good? No, like,
Yeah, and they're also gonna be going for like 100 different things, and are gonna like maybe nail 5 of those, and then halfway through development are going to come up with like another 100 things that just like happen while they're like, it's just like it's authorial intent is like already a terrible way to look at things, but then with games it's even more pointless, because it's like these are like live objects that are just like, that have tons of people working on them, all sharing their ideas. So yeah, I think that's like definitely like a dead end. And I think like with criticism, it's, for me, it's like, that's definitely part of it, where it's like one size doesn't fit all, but also I want to be surprised by the take and by the angle that the person writing about it is bringing. Like, I don't want to open a piece and kind of know what it's going to be from start to finish just from looking at the lead. And that's whenever I see like criticism that really like wows me, like it's definitely that, where I'm just like, this person is like coming at this with an angle that I had not considered, and like it is very well backed up, and it's very like thoughtful. And I think that is, I mean, it's hard to do that always, and often you'll get near misses, or you'll get, you know, interesting ideas that don't necessarily like land. But I think like, you don't want to just like throw out the baby with the bathwater of because of that, like because it's hard to do that, like, and that's what I think a lot of gamers like will will have that knee jerk reaction where it's like you're just making something up to like sound cool and sound pretentious or whatever. It's like no, they're like it's hard to come up with like with like interesting things to say sometimes, and it's hard to like to have a perspective that is like well considered, but also very experimental and very bold.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, I mean, the really, like it's a talent, and it's something that I really admire in the critics who are doing it well. But I think it is that about that element of surprise, the element of just like I couldn't have written I couldn't have written this, I couldn't have come up with this. Like that's awesome. Like, and like it could even be like a critique of Mario being capitalist. Like, and then like if they wrote it in the way that you're just like damn, like this is irrefutable. Like this is like such a like fire point. Like it could very well be a great piece of criticism. It's more like that like lack of surprise and that like reliance on tropes and on tired ideas where you're just like kind of get sleepy what reading it, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and again, not to be disparaging toward the idea of looking at Mario through that lens. But I'm just saying.
I'm tired of reading all these articles about capitalist Mario.
That's like the go-to like
Yeah.
angle where it's like, do we really have to talk about this game this way? But my point is more that like there's a lot more lenses out there, and I think that a lot of people just like don't really see them and just assume that they are all like that type of thing, where it's like let's look at this and how colonialist it is, and it just applied to like every single game, where it's like, okay, like we can do that to every game and get something worthwhile out of it, but there's also like other lenses through which people can look at games, and people are looking at games that just don't get the same amount of recognition because like those kinds of articles tend to get more attention from like assholes, essentially, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's what kind of defines the conversation, whereas like I can think of 10 ways to think about the Ascent, right? Like you could compare it to Cyberpunk 2077. I think the critique that I saw of this game was like kind of comparing it to that game and saying that it does a lot better of a job at like honing in on, the critiques that it's trying to create. I think it's saying basically it does a better job of that than Cyberpunk did, and that its world building is a bit better, etc. You do a lot of like, you could apply a lot of the same like ideas that they had applied to Cyberpunk to this. You can talk about this as a dungeon crawler and compare it to something like Diablo or even like Torchlight. You could talk about like this is how the gameplay of this compares to Smash TV, which is a game that I was playing recently and is a total fucking trip.
Yeah, it's a crazy game.
Weird game, man.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like it's funny because even the critic like Noah Gervais, who like the original thread was talking about, like, being like the critic because he's only about the material realities of the game. Like when he was talking about Resident Evil 5, he compared it to Raoul Peck's Destroy All the Brutes. He's like, it's like this like HBO documentary series about like a colonial lens of like Western media, basically Orientalism, and like specifically about how it looks at Africa. I'm like, that's pretty dope that he like pulled that out like in this 7-hour video about like Resident Evil. Like he can be this. He can talk about he can do a textual reading, like just talking about the mechanics of the game and the structure of it. But like clearly, criticism encompasses multiple things, and like you can like why rule out any one thing when like if you have a good enough reason to bring it up.
Yeah, and there's never enough acknowledgement, I think. I feel like we make too much of like these intertextual readings of like comparing one medium to another. We always talk about how like art is not created in a vacuum and how people are inspired by other things, but I don't think like people understand the extent to which that's true. Like so many artists are like referencing things or inspired by things that the person who's like consuming this piece of art might not really know about. And I think the knee jerk reaction is for people to kind of like just dismiss that that's there altogether, as opposed to just like just being like, no, that's just the way it is. Like they are really trying to do this, or they are pulling from this, and that's just how it works. But yeah, I think if that kind of thing was better understood, people would have like a little bit less of a hard time swallowing that pill. But I
Yeah, no
don't really
doubt.
think that's the world that we live in. So
That's fine. We have our
it
we have our
is what
people.
it is. Um, how do you? What is this Ascent footage telling you about the game so far? What are your questions about this game? You're burning the
Um,
Ascent questions.
why is your guy like have such a smooth chest? This is a smooth chest dude.
Yeah, that's a great question. I
In
don't
the
know.
future, do you not have chest hair?
All the customization in this game is weird. It's got that like shitty costume syndrome where like everyone else in the world looks cooler than you because like everything that you put on is just shit.
Oh no. That like Cyberpunk had that problem, right?
Yeah, Cyberpunk definitely had that problem. And I don't understand why this is a thing. Give characters better outfits. Just make the
Yeah.
default outfit cool. And like I understand that you have to like give a sense of progression and you can't just give them the cool suit at the beginning, but like something better
Yeah,
than
no,
this.
that's
Come on,
that's
dude.
garbage. Like I've been playing a little bit Bloodborne and
Yeah.
like replaying it. The first outfit's dope. The next outfit you get is like the one of the best ones in the game, like the hunter's outfit. Like done. But there's
Bloodborne is
just
a
a
great
ton of
example.
other outfits.
Great example. They need to change this system. People care a lot more about fashion in games than people think. I think, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Just let me change like my fucking whole outfit and then like just say I'm wearing different shoes or something when I equip something different. Who cares? That's just my opinion.
no, no. I mean, yeah, I think it's like, yeah, I think I agree. As like with Bloodborne, like the outfits don't really matter that much. Like, there's definitely outfits that are particular, like anti-poison stuff and like anti-fire stuff, but
Right.
you can also just like brute force it and it's fine. And the fashion is the most important thing, and that's totally legit. Like that is great. I mean, I enjoy the Souls like outfit setup or like the functionality with like you can't wear too much armor in the early Souls game, but I think Bloodborne is just like perfect. Whereas it's like I just want to look good.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Final Fantasy XIV is also good at letting you do that stuff. There's a lot of freedom in your glamours, as they call them.
Yeah,
Um,
you just gotta look good. You're gonna spending time looking at this character.
did
Might as well like be enjoying
there?
it.
So there are. Do you know about Final Fantasy XIV like lookbooks and stuff?
No,
There are websites dedicated to Final Fantasy XIV glamours, and people post fits on these websites.
nice, nice.
Let me let me find. Oh,
Yeah.
the eorzeacollection.com. It's like
Hmm.
it's the coolest thing because they have this thing called G pose where you can look at your character and just like pose them essentially for like these kind of fashiony looks. So this is the
Yeah, that's
coolest
good.
shit ever. I could go by role. Okay, I'm a tank. I can click tank. And then
The
you have
tank
these
line.
looks. Yeah, it's like, okay, I'm you can do okay, Gunbreaker, or actually let's do Paladin looks. And then you got these lookbooks of all these things, and you can even Leona inspired Sun Knight. See, they got these these 4 image. I love Leona from League of Legends, so I want to make an outfit that makes her look from the game. And then it tells you like what all the pieces are and where to get them. And
Wow.
it's like shop the look, you know?
Hmm.
When I found out about this,
Absolutely.
I was just tripping out. And I there's some pieces that are just straight up fashion pieces that you can get in this game that are just like leggings or a specific top or something, and they're equipable by like all classes and stuff.
I
But
love the idea that like to shop for the look, you're just like going out and like murdering like extremely difficult enemies, just like your version of like hitting them all in the Final Fantasy world.
right,
It's like, I need to
or
go like gank this dude to get this like sweet top.
there's some like really great tops that are only equipable by, say, um like that are only, or sorry, only, you can only acquire them via the like online store. So you actually have to like buy some articles of clothing. It's kind of nuts.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Getting that cash.
Yeah. But wow, what a look at these. Look at this. Edion Vales, the creator. Like this guy is just made this fucking website. This is just crazy. Look at this website.
That's so funny. This guy puts so much work into this website.
This is just for, this is only for people to post their outfits. It's a whole website. What's up, David?
Is he selling stuff?
No,
He's not selling. Just the game is selling.
No, you can post your own outfits on here. So like
Yeah.
these are people posting their own things.
Yeah.
I think this,
But they're not like farming them.
right. Fae Dancer. Just look at these images, man. Like this stuff
This is legit.
so cool. I love this. This is a slow ass website, dude. I'm an indecisive person.
He needs to work on the back end.
Yeah, he really does. Okay, so this is like I think this is one of those ones where you have to buy it on the website and it's like $3 or something. So you like just buy this and it's just, you only use it for fits.
Yeah.
But look at this pose. What is this? What is this?
The lighting is good too. It's like really, yeah.
I know you can have like glam lighting on your character in this G pose thing. And it's like literally like you're putting in console command type like / commands to change the lighting and stuff.
Oh, word.
In the game. It's nuts. Just look at this.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Sorry for going into this rabbit hole.
No, I mean that's legit. Like, because it's also just a full MMORPG like that you can play as a MMORPG, but then you can just do this,
Right.
and make like sick looking characters. Like, why not both?
This is why so many people play this game. This is why we need more diversity in video games, because you get, I like making outfits in video games. Let me fucking
It's very
do
important.
it. And let me take pictures of I want to have a dress up doll in my video game. I'm not afraid to say it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can't play another military shooter with like cargo pants and like tactical joggers.
Tactical
joggers. I
they're
can't.
at that like fashion point yet. I don't think they're to the fashion joggers yet.
Yeah, that's as far as they'll go.
What else did you play? Anything else you want to talk about before we I know it's a short ep, but you said
that's I mean, I've been playing a little Odin Sphere because I have the Vita. Just like it's been collecting dust, so I've been like, let me fire this up because it is a really awesome handheld.
What is Odin Sphere?
Load it up in the tubes, man. YouTube, get the preview.
All right.
It's Vanillaware, so it's like the same people as Dragon's Crown.
Wait.
It has like,
it's Sphere.
Yeah, Sphere.
Because the first thing,
and it's like
Odin's Spear.
No, it's like Odin singular and then Sphere.
Okay. Got it.
It's got some crazy language in that game. Like, I mean, it's cool. It's like very bespoke feeling and very like anachronistic, but it's like, it's like a fantasy side scroller game, but it also has a lot of RPG elements. Like you're leveling up.
Leaf
yes.
Here?
Life browser.
Life.
They're just like, they're just like coming up with all kinds of names. Like, it doesn't matter what it means. they just butchering the Romance languages.
Yeah, Japanese
Um,
approximations of Eastern like German shit is like absolutely bonkers.
yeah. But yeah, it has the Vanillaware style where it's like these like puppet animated characters or puppet animated like kind of 2D images uh, that just feel really unique. But it's also just like a dope game, very well constructed. Like you're juggling enemies, you got all sorts of like combo moves and magic spells you can use, and it has like, a lot of interesting elements for an RPG where you can like the way you level up is by eating food. So you grow food on the battlefield, like you'll plant it and use magic to like grow it, and then you'll eat it like in like 5 seconds, and then it'll like level you up. Um, and there's like also all these traveling merchants and like chefs that will like cook you like 20. It's kind of like Final Fantasy, the road trip one. I forget which 15, where you're just like they're all about meals and all about like fancy cuisine. So you'll hit up like a traveling like restaurant that will give you like a strawberry crepe and or like or just like a fancy like side of beef or something based on ingredients you find in the world. So there's elements to it that are just like it gets very detailed, but also like I was worried that it would feel really overwhelming just because of how much stuff is in it. Like where you're not just going around and hidden things, like you're also trying to grow food and shit. But it all works pretty well. Like it all like it doesn't really punish you for like decisions. Like you kind of I think it's set up in a way where any decision will result in a good result. Like it's kind of like a pretty light interactivity, but it's just like it's a really cool aesthetic and style, and it just feels really fun to play. Like
Yeah, this looks dope.
yeah.
Is this the Dragon's Crown people?
It is a Dragon's Crown people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did
So
they
I feel like
do
as far as like
13
Or is it-
Sentinels?
yeah, Vanillaware. Yeah,
Okay.
the thing is a company. And so yeah, I had this Vita and I haven't been using it so much. And like I was like, what are like the all-time Vita games? And I was like, this game definitely makes me wish I still had a commute. It's like one of the few things that made me wish I still had a commute because it's like perfect for that. Because you're just like running around these like maps, just like clearing room after room, and like collecting shit, and like it's great. It's like super well made, and it's like it's a really cool aesthetic. Like if you skip forward, like there's like once you meet like the one of the main characters is this like king character who's just like so big and so like awesome looking.
He's a large boy.
And like it's just like it is such a cool game to look at. Like it's just like the aesthetic wins me over every time. But I think it's also a pretty well made game.
It's kind of goofy.
Yeah. I mean, it's got this like fantasy storybook thing going on, and there's like furry animals and stuff, and like Disney looking like animals. But then you're also like murdering things left and right, and there's like underworlds and stuff. It gets dark, but it's also and like you follow different characters in this. Like there's like different chapters, and like you start with this Valkyrie character, and she gets married to some dude. She starts wearing like a wedding dress at some point. Like it's like corny, but also I don't know. It like works. This guy is so good. The barbarian guy is so good.
I feel like you're either in the world of Odin Sphere, you're either like a little girl or a weird
or a massive man.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the like Henry Darger documentary. Did you ever watch that one? Like it's like in the realm of the unknown, or something. It was like this documentary about this janitor that like wrote a kind of borderline creepy children's book in his spare time. But he wrote like hundreds and maybe thousands of pages of it and drew all these drawings and stuff, and like it has that like it's like a fantasy vibe, but also like a little creepy, like just because of the way everything moves and the way like everything's put together. there's like a darkness to it, while also being very like Disney.
Yeah, this has that.
Which Dragon's Crown is definitely like leans into more, where it's like more about like the ridiculous looking characters.
Right. And there was a lot of this game is problematic talk at that time.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to have a critical reassessment of Dragon's Crown.
Yeah. I think Odin Sphere is less that.
It looks a little bit less that.
Like it does not like. I mean, there's like definitely a big titty death lady you have to fight. But it's also like she's so grotesque. I don't know. It's a kind of a strange combination of things. Like I think what this game does is like the way it combines like anatomy, the way Vanillaware combines anatomy is like just very uncanny.
Right.
So even like when they try and make sexy looking things, like they're not actually like that attractive.
Yeah, and Dragon's Crown felt like it was along those lines as well. I mean, plus I feel like people are just more chill with like big titty characters in general these days. I think it's less of like
the world is safe for big titty characters again.
Depending on the context, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
This game looks
that's pretty cool.
So cool, man.
Yeah, you have like really like it's like a really interesting moveset.
Anything where you
like it's very aggressive
and like the whole screen stops for a second for you to like just watch it happen.
Yeah. And like and juggles. Juggles are so key.
And these like weird jagged lines on these like polygonal jagged lines on the slashes.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
If you have Vita lying around, definitely give it a shot.
Yeah,
I've been buying things for the Vita. I'm just like, somebody came out with this game, Russian Subway Dogs. It's kind of dope. I haven't opened it yet, but I was like, I'm buying things for the Vita.
For the Vita,
the PlayStation Store. It's online. I'm just downloading it. I'm like, I don't know how long it's gonna stay online. Yeah, it's like I'm not buying any physical media. I'm just like downloading this stuff. It's weird. Because I'm like not playing the Switch at all. I'm just like playing the Vita.
They need to get this for Switch.
Yeah, that would be sick. They should definitely like re-release it.
Or Dragon's Crown.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I remember Dragon's Crown was fun, but this looks better than Dragon's Crown maybe. I don't know.
It's got some layers. It's got some fun layers.
Yeah. Let me see. I don't think we had any other questions. I think maybe we had like one from last week. Because we did not get to our questions last week because we were like running super overtime. Let's see.
I'm game. Let's hear it.
Let's do like one question.
Do it.
Can you speak a little bit about narrative-driven games? Like how game mechanics and storytelling can affect each other and stuff. So I guess like we talk about the interplay between narrative and gameplay for a second, which I feel like we did a little bit earlier this episode.
Mm-hmm.
But there's like a very, I don't know. I almost feel like over time I've become less interested in narrative overall in video games.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something that I used to care
depends.
about. Yeah, it definitely depends, but it's something that I kind of saw as the primary channel through which video games could be artistically expressive, I guess, where it was like if it's gonna be art, it's gotta have a great touching story, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like the way I like with
gotta make you cry.
It's gotta be able to make me cry through some sad plot point, you know?
Yeah.
And then like Shadow the Colossus was like one of my main like video games can be art thing, but even then that's not like the narrative isn't necessarily what's doing that for me in that game, you know?
I guess like technically it is, right? Like there's a narrative versus like a plot or it's like, you know, there's less storytelling and more thematically telling a story.
I guess it's like it's
You need the
narrative in the
context.
sense of like the puppy was sad is a narrative, you know? Like or watching like a dog be sad, like a small dog be sad. Like when you would
Yeah.
kill a colosso, I would just be like, "God, this is terrible. This is so what a beautiful creature. I killed it." Um and that
Yeah, it is
was
a little bit like
my
just like
feeling.
kicking a puppy. Yeah.
They're definitely like you're a bad person for doing that.
This thing we made you do.
Yeah, that's it's definitely in that whole era of like you're a jerk because you did the thing that we told you to do and you can't play the game unless you do this thing. Um,
Mm,
but that being said, I think over time that view has changed for me a little bit to be more that narrative is something that I care about in games where like narrative is a primary thing that drives the game.
yep.
It's like such a stupid thing to say, but like, um, but yeah, like it has its place, um, and but I do not see it any. I guess the point here is that I no longer see it as the primary factor in what makes a game like quote artistically viable, and I don't see it as like a primary vehicle through which video games can be expressive now.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think it is part of it is like, yeah, maybe it is like how we are defining it, right? Because yeah, I think for a while it was about text heavy games. It was games that had a lot of story to give us. And there, I think Shadow Classes is perfectly fine, like perfectly like legitimate as a like narrative game, even though it's like, yeah, it's like a narrative is very direct and very minimal. Um, and yeah, like I don't think it would like I wouldn't rule it out as a narrative game. Maybe it's like games that are more about telling a linear story using the interactive medium, like that, whereas it kind of feels like a little like mismatched, where it feels like you're clicking through an like I just I played like Genesis Noir in the beginning of the year, and it felt a little like that, where it's like I'm watching an animation that's really dope, but also my only role in this is to press next, essentially, or move my guy to the next scene, or very minimal interactivity. Um, and it's like the kind of it's kind of rude because it's the kind of complaints that like gamers had about walking simulators 10 years ago, like where it's like, oh, I can't even do anything. But yeah, I think it's like I feel like there are ways where it's like not doing anything can feel more involved. Like Return of the Oberdin, for example, you are not doing anything technically, but it feels you're in the game. Like you're wandering through these vignettes and you're activating them, and you're also untangling them. There's a huge mechanic of like figuring out who's on the ship, but it's a pretty narrative. I would consider it a narrative game. Um, I think that's where it's like most interesting for me, where it's like they're finding out ways that the interactivity and the narrative can interrelate in ways that are like really new and interesting versus um, something more like interactive fiction where it's like or choose your own adventure. I think that like that style is kind of seen as much as it's going to see in terms of like just straight ahead interactive fiction. I think it's more about like I think there's a lot of room for narrative in games, but in ways that are experimental, that are more like that are more interesting and that actually take advantage of it being a video game.
Right. And I also think that this question has gotten harder to answer in a kind of clean way in the past like 10 years or so, because if you think about it, like when games, first came around, narrative was something to aspire to. Having any sort of narrative that could, make you feel anything or that was evocative in any way, shape, or form was a big deal. Up through, I want to say, almost like the PlayStation era, like everyone was kind of concerned with like just being arcadey, because that was kind of the bar that games had set for themselves. And then, 20 like BioShock era, like a little bit previous, like a little bit prior to that, people were like, can a game make you cry and shit like that.
Yeah.
The whole like PS2, again, Shadow of the Colossus era, I think that's why Shadow of the Colossus comes up primarily for me, because it's like, you had stuff like Metal Gear, stuff that was kind of pushing the envelope narrative wise, but now we are in this environment where you bring up the good point, which is that like a lot of things are narratively experimental in ways that those weren't, and it's not necessarily it's hard to define like what a narrative driven game is, because narrative shows its face in so many different ways in today's video game environment. And it's like, it's so hard to even think about what a narrative driven game looks like these days. Like, I guess Disco Elysium would be the kind of the narrative driven game, because like you're just talking to people the whole time. But it's also, it's also character driven. It's like in a kind of like literary sense, and even that is not super clean cut. So yeah, I would say that over time the concept of narrative in video games has become more and more complex, but compared to what games used to look like, we're in a whole different world where just, yeah, of course narrative is important. And I think like just the fact that it is such a focal point for what people are doing with the form and how they change the approach is a big deal. And I mean, another game that we hadn't even brought up that has also had a profound effect on narrative in video games is Dark Souls, where it's like, it's not telling you like anything. You're just picking up items and kind of discovering things about the world yourself, which in itself is like adding an interactive element to the game. And while it's not like, quote, narrative driven, there's a lot of narrative stuff that is driving you forward in that game too. So,
and then even that's like inspired by like Shadow of the Colossus and Ico kind of style of approach, where it can be as simple as, I'm killing this big cute dog and this sucks. Like, I'm sad about this. And even like finding out why the dog is fighting you is not as impactful as the actual fight.
Right.
It's like just letting the interactivity tell a story, which, yeah, Dark Souls is great at. Like it'll give you as much or as little as you need. And if you're like interested in it, then you actually like, you can look deeper into it. But it works on the level of the actual pure play of engaging with it. Because I was thinking about why Destiny doesn't hit as hard in terms of because I think like Destiny takes some weird lessons from Dark Souls, where they're like, the lore exists, but it's hidden in another layer, like it's hidden in another castle.
Right.
You can't find out about the game story by playing the game. Like, you have to look up these like grimoire cards, and there's a ton of history that you can read about that is, ostensibly interesting. But I think like where it doesn't work is like Dark Souls, you can still get a lot of the feel of the game, of what you're doing, without looking at the item descriptions. But I think Destiny is just like, I don't know, why the fuck am I here? Why am I like killing these green guys? Like, why is there a robot talking to me? Why is there wizards? Like, they throw a ton of proper nouns in the game itself because they can't help themselves, and then it's such a mess. Like, so actually, like, that's a case where like you can see why Dark Souls works, and it's more than just withholding straight lore. It's like there's actually like a way to tell an interactive narrative, like a narrative through an interactivity that isn't just like hiding it and behind like a layer of like items.
That's really interesting, and I feel like that is a definite step that games have taken, where I tend not to care as much about story in games these days, especially in a game where I'm just in it to shoot stuff. Like, I've been skipping all the cutscenes in Halo, or this Halo at least. But at the same time, you have this like lore as mise en scène thing where it's like there's this history obviously hidden in these buildings that helps the design of how these worlds are built, and that the world building is contained within the buildings themselves and what this place looks like, um
Yeah.
in a way that's not like spray paint on a wall, like let me out of here environmental storytelling shit, but it's like, oh, like clearly this used to be a great kingdom, but it's fallen a long way since then. I feel like that is like the new spray paint on the wall thing, where it's like crumbling testaments to greatness past or whatever.
Yeah. Like, what's the
Very,
way we can express this through level design?
yeah, yeah. But that is really interesting to me too, because like even if I'm not reading all the passages, like you can feel it when you're playing the game, right? Like that's something that that is in Death's Door, where even if I don't get what the fuck's going on in the lore of that game, I'm like, like you're creating explanations for these things in your brain. Like Hollow Knight did that too. And
Mhm.
often it's like in a horror film when they don't show the monster, it's like way scarier than when they do. It's like sometimes the lore is way more interesting in your head than when you actually read the fucking thing, you know? Um
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's generally where I've landed too. I mean, there's definitely ways to get direct storytelling. Like, I mean, like what became of Edith Finch, I thought did a pretty good job in parts, like where it kind of allowed you to like play out the story like you were in the book, like where there's a kind of like there's a part where you're listening to the story about a guy in a fishing factory, and you're like cutting fish and also having like these daydreams.
right.
That stuff's cool, but again, it falls under like experimental approaches, whereas it's not just like here's a wall of text,
Yeah.
please read it and then go next. Like that, I think that is not enough.
Yeah, and there's just so many ways to go about it now.
Mhm.
Um but some of them are really good, and I do like the story as environment thing that we have going on now, and I'm chill with like letting that be just a trope for a minute, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think we did a good job of answering that one for being such a wide ranging topic. But I think we could kind of wrap here if there's nothing else that you want to talk about specifically.
No, it's been a great talk. I mean, I'm ready to open the door and let some cool air in this room.
Same. I know the feeling, man. Like my computer's just chugging. It's like 10 degrees hotter in here than it is outside, and I have fucking door
Yeah.
open and everything. But Yussef Cole, thank you for joining us or me today. Kyle, oh, I didn't explain why Kyle's gone. He's working on his video game. He's got some big dates to meet. So he showed me an exclusive trailer for his game. And
Oh
wow,
shit.
it looks like a game. It looks like a game. It was kind of a trip seeing it because it's like my friend's making a game, but now I see this trailer and I'm like, my friend's making a game that looks pretty fucking cool, you know? So shouts out
Yeah.
to Kyle doing cool stuff.
Woo.
Wishlist Cantata, Cantata. Support my fellow Bad End co-host, and support my current interim fellow Bad End co-host for today, Yussef Cole. Thank you for being here again. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at YouMeYou, and that's where most of my stuff is. And I also edit bullet points with Reed McCarter, and that's on Superculture, which this podcast is also on.
Yes, Superculture Network. Um, yeah, I'll do my wrap up stuff now. This is Bad End Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Bad End Podcast. You can email us at, oh geez, I always get this mixed up, dude. At Bad End Podcast, yes. And then we're on Gmail at badendpod@gmail.com. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/badend, which will give you access to the Superculture Discord, and you can talk with me and Yussef and Kyle and Reed and everyone who's part of our community. I actually went and played tennis with a Superculture Discord member last weekend. It was a lot of fun.
Hell yeah, get the exercise.
We got some exercise. We're doing some fun stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Later.
Later.
Do the whole outro. Okay.